Welcome to Old Worlds for Sleep, where history breathes and whispers, and forgotten lives unfold beneath the hush of midnight. Tonight we drift back to Victorian England, a world of lace and law, of polished manners and invisible prisons. Behind the polished silver and quiet dinners, women lived lives no one recorded, lives of patience, strategy, and silent defiance. This is the story of one such woman, a wife who learned that survival could look like devotion, and rebellion could hide in a diary's pages. They called her obedient. They called her proper. But she was writing the revolution in ink only she could read. As the fire burns low and the house settles into stillness, close your eyes and step inside the walls of Whitmore Hall, where whispers become weapons and silence becomes power. The first sound you hear is the slow crackle of the fireplace, faint, uncertain, like it's deciding whether to keep burning. The second is your mother's voice. Up now, darling. The day's begun. You open your eyes to a dim room draped in velvet and lace. The morning light struggles through the heavy curtains, spilling gold across the embroidered coverlet. Your breath fogs slightly in the chill. Central heating doesn't exist yet. The world of 1860 greets you with cold floors and colder expectations. You sit up, the weight of your thick cotton nightgown pressing against your skin. The air bites. Every movement feels slower here, heavier. Outside, a carriage wheel rattles across cobblestones, fading into the distance. You've just woken up as an 18-year-old woman in Victorian England. The day your mother has been preparing you for your entire life. Your season begins now. She enters the room, face pale and composed, the kind of beauty carved from self-discipline rather than joy. Today, she says, we begin. You nod, but something inside you hesitates. You don't know what's beginning or ending. The maid brings warm water in a porcelain bowl. Steam rises like ghosts. You wash your face, the chill of the water cutting through the fog of sleep. In the mirror, a stranger stares back, pale, obedient, and uncertain. Your hair is brushed until it shines. Your stays are tightened, not painfully but firmly, a reminder that posture and perfection matter more than comfort. Then come the layers: chemise, petticoats, stockings, gloves. By the time you're dressed, you no longer feel like a person, but a presentation. Remember, your mother says, fastening a brooch at your collar. A lady's worth is measured by her restraint. You nod again, even though the words feel heavy on your tongue. Downstairs, breakfast waits, eggs cooling on china, tea steaming faintly, silver utensils gleaming in precise formation. Your father reads the newspaper, silent behind its rustling pages. Your brother glances at you, sympathetic perhaps, but says nothing. Everyone knows what this day means. You are not simply being introduced to society. You are being introduced to the market. Imagine for a moment, every move you make, every word you speak, every breath you take, being watched, measured, and noted. A tilt of the head could be seen as arrogance, a laugh as impropriety, a silence as dullness. Would you survive a world where reputation was more fragile than glass? How carefully could you move if one mistake meant ruin? Later, your mother walks you through the garden, rehearsing introductions and conversations as though she were training you for battle. The first impression lasts forever, she says. You practice polite smiles that don't quite reach your eyes. You practice greetings that sound warm but reveal nothing real. Each step crunches frost beneath your boots, and you wonder if every woman before you has walked this same path, smiling through the cold, preparing for a life she didn't choose. A robin lands on the fence beside you. You pause. It hops closer, tilting its head as if in question. The simple freedom in that tiny creature feels almost unbearable. You smile at it, and your mother clears her throat sharply. Eyes forward, dear. Daydreaming gives the wrong impression. Do you remember the first time someone told you not to dream too loudly? When did ambition become a flaw instead of a fire? By afternoon, the house fills with noise. Seamstresses, hat boxes, the scent of starch and lavender. You're fitted for dresses, morning, afternoon, evening, walking, dinner. Each garment tells the world your status, your modesty, your family's ambition. As pins prick your sleeves, the woman measuring you murmurs, "You'll do well. You've the face for obedience." She means it as a compliment. You don't reply. You just watch your reflection disappear behind the flurry of fabric. Evening arrives, slow and golden. You sit by the fire, embroidery in hand, pretending to focus while your mother discusses invitations with a neighbor. Names are spoken, Titles, fortunes, reputations. Not one mention of love. It's strange how easily they discuss your future as if you were furniture being placed in the correct room. When the neighbor leaves, your mother squeezes your hand. You must understand, my dear. A woman's freedom lies in choosing the right cage. Her words settle like dust on your skin. You nod again because what else can you do? Night falls. You lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the flicker of a single candle stretching shadows across the room. Outside, the city hums with distant life. Laughter, carriage wheels, footsteps, all belonging to people who can move freely after dark. You can't help but wonder, who decided this was the only path? What would happen if you simply refused to follow it? But you know the answer. In this world, refusal isn't rebellion. It's ruin. Still, as your eyes grow heavy, a strange feeling stirs inside you. Not quite defiance, not yet courage, but the quiet beginning of both. So tell me, if you woke up in 1860 in this house with this future, would you obey quietly or start looking for the cracks in the walls? Would you follow the rules to survive or break them to truly live? Morning arrives wrapped in nerves and starch. The maid draws the curtains and sunlight pours across the room, not warm but exposing. Every speck of dust, every crease in your dress, every imperfection feels magnified. Today isn't just another day. It's presentation day, the day society decides if you belong. Your mother's voice cuts through the quiet. Posture, darling. Always posture. She fastens your stays tighter than usual, pulling until your breath becomes a series of shallow, careful sips. You're a sculpture being refined, a figure shaped for public display. Chemise, corset, petticoat, overskirt, bodice. Each layer adds weight but also invisibility. By the time she pins the final ribbon, you can barely recognize yourself in the mirror. Elegant, yes, but distant, as if your reflection belongs to someone else entirely. Downstairs, the carriage waits. Horses snort clouds into the cold morning air. The seat cushions are firm beneath you, but your thoughts churn softer and faster. You pass rows of grand houses, windows glowing with domestic perfection. Inside each one, another woman is preparing for the same unspoken audition. Every season, the same ritual repeats. Young women displayed like fine china, men inspecting them with polite disinterest, mothers pretending this is all perfectly natural. The unspoken truth: this is an economy of beauty and obedience. Your value rises with your silence. Tell me, when was the last time you felt judged for simply existing? Have you ever smiled because someone expected it, not because you meant it? The ballroom is a kaleidoscope of color and chatter. Gas lamps shimmer overhead, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and polished boots. The air hums with perfume and ambition. You stand beside your mother, every muscle rehearsed. Your face fixed in what she calls pleasant neutrality, friendly but never forward. Around you, laughter flutters like birds trapped in a golden cage. Don't stare, she whispers. Let them look first. You glance across the room. A sea of faces, powdered and painted into perfection. The men's eyes move like invisible fingers, appraising, ranking, dismissing. You can almost feel it, the silent calculation happening in their minds. Her family name? Her dowry? Her posture? Everything is currency. Your stomach twists. You tell yourself it's nerves, not nausea. Would you endure being measured like merchandise if it meant safety? How many layers of etiquette would it take before you forgot how to breathe? A woman you barely know smiles at you, her eyes glazed with the same polite exhaustion you feel. She whispers as she passes, "Smile, dear. We're all pretending." You almost laugh, but you remember, laughter must be quiet, delicate, non-threatening. Even joy has a rule book. Across the room, a gentleman bows. He's older than you by a decade, maybe more. Your mother's hand presses lightly on your arm. That's Lord Pembroke. He owns half of Devon. You curtsy, your skirts whispering against the floor. He asks the expected questions, about reading, about music, about the weather, and you give the expected answers, polite and small. You can feel his gaze measuring the cut of your dress, the calmness in your tone. He's not looking for connection. He's looking for compliance. When the conversation ends, he bows again, satisfied. Your mother beams as if you've passed an exam. Do you think you could play a role this perfectly if the prize was security? At what point does pretending stop being survival and start becoming surrender? Hours pass in a blur of introductions and formalities. You sip lemonade you don't want, dance steps you don't enjoy, laugh at jokes you don't find funny. The air feels heavier with every passing minute. By the third dance, your feet ache, your corset pinches, and your smile begins to tremble at the edges. But trembling isn't allowed. Victorian women don't wilt. They glow faintly until exhaustion becomes elegance. Your mother whispers, head high. You're doing beautifully. You nod, even though you feel like a ghost inside your own skin. Then across the ballroom, a pair of brown eyes catch yours. Not calculating, not appraising, simply curious. A gentleman you don't know, watching you as if trying to read a language written in silence. Your pulse flickers, quick and frightened. You look away before your mother notices. Still, something inside you shifts, small but undeniable. Later, as the carriage rattles home through the fog, your mother sighs with satisfaction. You were perfection, my dear. Every eye was on you. You stare out the window, the city lights fading into darkness. Perfection feels like a prison, and you're only at the beginning of your sentence. Back in your room, you unlace the stays layer by layer until your lungs expand again. You breathe deeply for the first time all day, the air sharp and cold. Your reflection looks softer now, human again. But beneath the relief, a question burns quietly. Is this the price of being chosen? Or the punishment for being born a woman in the wrong century? So tell me, if everyone around you expected obedience, could you pretend forever? Would you rather be admired as perfection, or remembered as trouble? The morning after the ball, your hands still tremble, not from excitement but from exhaustion. Every movement from last night replays in your mind. The smiles, the curtsies, the perfectly timed breaths. Your mother calls it grace. You call it survival. She appears in your doorway before breakfast, carrying something that looks delicate and harmless, an ivory fan painted with faint silver leaves. You'll need this, she says. Her tone makes it sound less like a gift and more like a weapon. She sits beside you on the edge of the bed. This, she says, snapping the fan open with a soft click, is not for decoration. It is your voice. She demonstrates, slow, precise, controlled, holding the fan closed against her left cheek. No. Moving it to her right. Yes. Fanning herself quickly. I wish to speak with you. Slowly. I am taken. Drawing it across the forehead. We are being watched. Dropping it to the floor. We belong to each other. A whole language hidden in silk and motion. Every gesture carries meaning. Every flick could be an invitation, a warning, or a goodbye. You practice trying to memorize the movements. Your mother corrects your angle, your speed, your expression. Never too fast. Never too emotional. Even rebellion must be graceful. By the time you finish the lesson, your wrist aches. But something else stirs beneath the exhaustion. Something dangerously close to curiosity. If words are forbidden, maybe secrets can still breathe through gestures. Maybe silence can be rewritten. Have you ever learned to speak in a way no one else understood? Could you hide truth inside beauty and not get caught? That afternoon, you bring the fan to the sitting room. Sunlight slants across the polished floor. The air smells faintly of lavender and tea. Your aunt and cousin visit for tea, their voices floating in that polite, feathered way Victorian women have mastered. They talk about recipes and ribbons, but underneath the conversation is a current of coded messages. She looked pale last week, your aunt says softly. Your mother replies. Her husband travels often. They exchange glances, sympathy disguised as etiquette. Even here, language hides inside silence. Your cousin, newly married, flutters her fan lazily. You notice how it lingers just a moment too long near her left cheek. No. You wonder, who is she saying no to? And who is watching closely enough to notice? When the guests leave, you linger by the window, opening and closing the fan in slow rhythm. It feels powerful in your hands, small, harmless, and dangerous all at once. You realize the irony. Women denied voices have invented an entire dictionary of rebellion. That evening, your mother hosts a dinner for friends of the family. The table glitters with crystal and silver. Conversation flows like a performance everyone rehearsed for years. Across from you sits Mr. Whitmore, the gentleman whose brown eyes caught yours at the ball. When your mother introduces him again, you feel your pulse quicken. His bow is perfect, his smile polite, but there's something behind it, a spark of recognition. As the meal continues, you find your eyes drifting toward him against your will. He catches you once, then twice, then again. This time he smiles faintly. Your fan trembles in your hand. A simple motion, Yet your mind races through possibilities. Should you risk it? Should you speak this secret language in a room full of eyes? You hold the fan open halfway and tilt it slightly in your right hand. I like you, but proceed carefully. Just bold. Too bold, perhaps. He pauses, then adjusts the way he holds his glass. A subtle movement that mimics your rhythm. He understands. He knows. Your heart pounds under the layers of lace and propriety. For the first time, you're part of a conversation that doesn't require permission. Can a single glance feel louder than a shout? If you found freedom hidden inside a rule, would you dare to use it? When the guests leave, your mother praises your composure. You were perfectly charming, she says. Mr. Whitmore seemed most impressed. You nod, hiding the trembling of your hands inside the folds of your skirt. She has no idea that you've already spoken to him, silently, dangerously, fluently. Later, alone in your room, you unfold the fan once more. You trace its edges with your fingertips, memorizing the soft texture of rebellion. This object, so fragile, so feminine, feels like your first weapon. The clock ticks softly. Somewhere outside, the foghorn moans along the Thames. The world sleeps under the illusion of order. But you're awake, and for the first time, you know a secret. Even within silence, power exists. You only need to learn how to use it. So tell me, if the world forbade you to speak, could you invent your own language? Could you whisper freedom through elegance and never get caught? The invitation arrives 3 days later, pressed in cream-colored paper and sealed with gold. Your name, Miss Harrison, is written in perfect cursive. Your mother reads it aloud as though she already knows the script. The Whitmores request the pleasure of your company for an evening of music and dance. You try to seem calm, but your pulse betrays you. You know who will be there. You know why this invitation matters. Your maid lays out the gown chosen for the occasion, a pale blue silk that glows softly in candlelight. The corset fits tighter tonight. Your mother insists on perfection. Each breath feels deliberate, earned. A delicate necklace, gloves white as innocence, hair pinned high with pearl pins that catch the light. When you look in the mirror, you barely recognize the girl staring back. Her eyes look calm, but her heartbeat tells another story. Have you ever walked into a room knowing everyone would judge your worth in seconds? Could you stay graceful if your future depended on it? The carriage ride feels endless. Your mother sits beside you, adjusting her gloves with military precision. Remember, she says, a smile is your greatest defense. Never too wide, never too long. The streets hum with gas lamps and the sound of hooves. You glimpse your reflection in the window, half shadow, half expectation. Outside, the world feels alive. Inside, you feel rehearsed. When you arrive, music spills from the grand hall, violins weaving through laughter and the clink of crystal. The air glows with gold and perfume. Dozens of eyes glance toward the door as your name is announced. You step forward, one heartbeat at a time, a performer stepping onto the stage of her own destiny. The first few moments blur. Polite nods, introductions, the constant hum of conversation about weather, travel, and social alliances disguised as small talk. You play your part perfectly, every quite so landing where it should. Then you see him, Mr. Charles Whitmore, standing near the orchestra, speaking to another gentleman. His brown eyes flicker toward you, and for a moment, the rest of the room dissolves. He bows slightly, the hint of a smile touching his lips. Your mother's hand finds your arm again, gently guiding you toward him like a general steering a soldier into battle. Mr. Whitmore, she says, you remember my daughter? Indeed, he replies. It would be difficult to forget. You curtsy. The orchestra begins a new song, soft, deliberate, almost hesitant. The next dance, Miss Harrison? He asks. Your mother nods before you can answer. It isn't really a choice. Would you say yes if everyone around you already had? When was the last time you made a decision that truly belonged to you? The dance begins. His gloved hand finds yours, formal, respectful, but real. You move together in slow circles under chandeliers that drip light like melted stars. The music swells, filling the space between you. Each turn blurs the crowd into color and sound. Your skirts sweep across the polished floor, the faint rustle sounding like the whisper of rain. For a moment, you forget the rules. You forget your posture, your training, the weight of watching eyes. There is only rhythm and warmth and the faint scent of cedar from his coat. It's nothing scandalous, no word, no touch that breaks decorum, but something passes between you that feels forbidden nonetheless. A glance that lingers too long. A breath caught between measures. A heartbeat that stumbles out of rhythm. When the music ends, the spell breaks like glass. He bows, you curtsy. The applause for the orchestra feels distant, unreal. Your mother appears at your side immediately, smiling for the crowd but whispering through her teeth. Careful, my dear. Tension is good. Attachment is dangerous. You nod, still dizzy. Mr. Whitmore moves away, already swallowed by the crowd of gentlemen in glittering gowns. But his gaze finds you once more before he disappears into the music. You know somehow that this dance was not the last. Can a single moment change the direction of your life? Would you risk reputation for a heartbeat of real connection? Back home, the night stretches endlessly. Your gown lies across the chair like the ghost of the girl who wore it. You sit by the window, staring at the stars peeking through London's fog. Somewhere out there, he's doing the same, perhaps thinking of the dance or perhaps not at all. But you can still feel the warmth of his hand through your glove. It's both nothing and everything. Your mother's words echo softly, attachment is dangerous. You whisper back, so is emptiness. The clock strikes midnight. Tomorrow the world will look exactly the same. But you won't. Something inside you has shifted, quietly, invisibly, irrevocably. So tell me, if you had one chance to feel something real in a world built on appearances, would you take it knowing it might cost you everything? Would you dance anyway? Days pass, but the memory of that first dance clings to you like perfume that won't fade. You tell yourself it was nothing, just a waltz, one of dozens that evening, but your mind replays it anyway. The warmth of his hand through your glove. The quiet rhythm of your heart's trying to keep the same pace. You've been taught that emotion is dangerous. That too much feeling makes a woman weak, unwise, unworthy. But what if restraint is its own kind of cage? Each morning, you pretend to read in the drawing room while your mother writes invitations and letters. The same names appear again and again. The Pembrokes, the Fairchilds, the Whitmores. It's almost as if the entire upper class were one continuous conversation. One endless exchange of favors, marriages, and unspoken bargains. Then one afternoon, your mother looks up from her writing desk and says almost casually, "Mr. Whitmore will be joining us for tea on Thursday." Your hand stills mid-page. You nod politely, pretending you hadn't been waiting for those exact words. Thursday arrives too soon. The house smells of roses and lemon polish. The silver teapot gleams like a mirror, and your mother's posture is sharper than usual, a sure sign she's nervous, though she'd never admit it. You sit beside her as he enters the room. Charles Whitmore, bowing just deeply enough, smiling just softly enough. Every gesture practiced, every word measured. And yet, when his eyes meet yours, something in them feels unrehearsed. He compliments the tea, the weather, the garden. Each topic chosen with surgical precision to avoid impropriety. Your mother leads the conversation like a conductor, steering it toward family background, inheritance, and reputation. But you notice how his gaze flickers toward your fan resting on your lap, folded neatly but alive in your fingers. Tell me, have you ever hidden your truest thoughts behind polite conversation? Could you say everything you mean without speaking a single word? When your mother excuses herself to check on the servants, the silence that follows feels enormous. You hear only the ticking of the mantel clock. Then, very slightly, you tilt your fan open halfway. Your pulse leaps. He notices. Of course he does. "I trust you've been keeping busy since the dance?" he asks, his voice calm, but his eyes alight with quiet understanding. You nod, pretending innocence. "Reading, practicing, learning." He tilts his head. "And what do you read, Miss Harrison?" You hesitate. Jane Eyre sits unfinished on your bedside table. A scandalous choice for a debutante. You should say Milton or Cooper or some harmless sermon. Instead, you say it anyway. "I prefer novels that ask questions about freedom." Pause. Then a faint smile. "Ah," he says, "then we have that in common." The conversation returns to safer waters, but something unspoken flows beneath every sentence. A current you both feel but neither can name. When your mother returns, you are both the picture of composure. Two well-bred individuals discussing books and weather. But inside, an entire language of rebellion hums just below the surface. That evening, when you're finally alone, you write his name once on a scrap of paper, Charles Whitmore, then fold it tightly and hide it in a drawer. You know how dangerous even that could be if discovered. Women have been ruined for less than a name. Still you keep it. A secret, small and weightless, but powerful in its defiance. Would you risk everything for something that isn't even real yet? What's the smallest act that's ever made you feel alive? In the weeks that follow, the pattern continues. Tea visits, library encounters, church pews filled just close enough for your shoulders to sense one another's presence. Each meeting unfolds like a chess match. Every move deliberate, every smile a strategy. At the lending library, you happen to reach for the same book, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Your fingers brush. He pulls back first, eyes flickering to the clerk. "Take it," he murmurs. "You saw it first." You shake your head. "We can share." The clerk looks confused, but neither of you explains. The book passes between you, a silent agreement disguised as coincidence. You will each read half before the week is over. You will meet again, of course, to discuss it. Have you ever built something sacred out of small risks? Can you love someone properly when you're not allowed to be alone with them? Each night, your mother praises your restraint. "You're learning well," she says. "You've been perfectly proper." You nod, hiding your secret smile behind the rim of your teacup. Because the truth is, you've learned far more than she realizes. You've learned that love in this world must be clever. It must hide in margins, in glances, in borrowed novels and coded gestures. Freedom, you realize, doesn't always mean escape. Sometimes, it means learning to speak without being heard. You lie awake long after the lamps are extinguished, the faint scent of roses and parchment clinging to your pillow. Somewhere miles away, he's probably reading the same book under the same quiet moonlight. Two minds meeting in secret, bound by rules, divided by decorum, but connected by something far more dangerous: understanding. So tell me, if every rule you followed was designed to keep you from love, would you obey them? Or learn, like her, to break them beautifully? Autumn settles over London like a veil, soft light, long shadows, and whispers behind closed doors. Your courtship with Charles Whitmore has lasted only a few months, but already society has begun to talk. You've danced together 3 times. You've exchanged books. You've met at precisely the right number of dinners to make your connection undeniable, but still respectable. You would think love was the point of all this. But in Victorian England, love is an accessory, pretty but optional. Marriage is business, and business is booming. Your father spends more and more time in his study. You hear low voices behind the door, the clink of decanters, the rustle of papers. When you pass, you catch fragments of conversation. A fair dowry. Secure inheritance. Heirs expected within the first 2 years. It feels surreal to realize they're talking about you. About your body. Your future. Your price. Tell me, have you ever listened to someone discuss your worth as if you weren't in the room? What do you think your freedom would cost if someone tried to buy it? One evening, your mother enters your room, face composed but eyes shining with a kind of restrained triumph. "Mr. Whitmore's father called today," she says. "They'll be visiting this weekend to finalize the arrangements." You nod, pretending calm, though your pulse beats like a drum beneath your skin. Arrangements. That word again. Not proposal. Not promise. Arrangement. You think of the small, quiet moments you've shared with Charles. Conversations about books, secret smiles across rooms, the silent understanding of 2 people trying to breathe within rules made by others. And you wonder, is that enough to build a life upon? Or are you simply 2 polite prisoners who learn to love their chains? Saturday arrives heavy with expectation. The Whitmore carriage gleams outside the gate. Your father greets them in his best waistcoat, your mother radiant and controlled. You're called into the parlor like an exhibit on display, gracefully silent, impeccably dressed. Charles looks the same, though something in his expression has changed. Less curiosity, more calculation. He's polite, kind even, but you see the weight of family expectations behind his eyes. The conversation between fathers begins smoothly, full of numbers, conditions, and clauses disguised as compliments. You stand at your mother's side, smiling faintly, hands folded. No one asks what you want. No one even pretends to. When the men retire to the study, your mother squeezes your hand. "This is how things are done, my dear. You'll understand one day." You want to ask when. When does understanding arrive? After the vows? After the loss? Or only when it's too late to matter? Would you accept a lifetime decision made entirely for you? How many polite lies can you tell before one of them becomes your truth? That night, you lie awake listening to the low hum of male voices through the floorboards. They speak in the language of contracts and inheritance, of property and legacy. You realize they're not discussing a marriage, they're drafting a merger. You picture your life reduced to a paragraph on parchment. In consideration of the union between the families Harrison and Whitmore, the sum of £10,000 shall be settled upon the bride. It's neat, efficient, devoid of heartbeat. The candle on your bedside table burns low. You imagine walking into that study, tearing the documents apart, shouting that you're not an asset, not an investment, not a name to be transferred from one man to another. But you don't. Because you know what would follow: scandal, ruin, whispers that would cling to your family like smoke. And so you remain silent. For now. The next morning, the deal is sealed. Your father calls you into the drawing room. He looks proud, satisfied. Mr. Whitmore has requested permission to court you formally, he says. The matter is settled. You smile because you're supposed to. You curtsy because it's expected. And somewhere deep inside, you feel the quiet snap of something breaking. Something soft and invisible, like the last thread of a dream. That evening, Charles visits again. He bows as always, says all the right words. But when he takes your hand, there's a moment, just a flicker, of honesty. I hope you don't feel trapped, he says gently. You meet his gaze. I think we're both trapped, you whisper. For the first time, neither of you smiles. Would you marry for security, knowing love might never come? Could you live in comfort if it meant surrendering your soul? Later, you sit at your writing desk, staring at the blank page. The house is quiet, your parents content, the contract signed. Outside, the city hums with distant carriages, the rhythm of lives moving forward. You dip your pen into ink. For a long time, you don't write a word. Then finally, in careful script, you write. A woman's future begins with a man's agreement. You stop, then add beneath it. But perhaps one day it won't. You blot the ink, close the journal, and blow out the candle. In the darkness, you feel something small but unmistakable. A spark refusing to die, no matter how many rules are built to smother it. So tell me, if your destiny were decided by someone else, would you follow quietly? Or would you start planning your escape even if it took a lifetime? The morning arrives like a pageant, rehearsed and irreversible. Light filters through lace curtains, pale and cool, brushing across rows of folded garments. Your wedding dress lies on the chaise, shimmering faintly in the half-light, white silk and tiny pearls, innocent and impossible. You stare at it, not as a dream fulfilled, but as a sentence about to be carried out. Downstairs, you hear the bustle of servants, the creak of carriage wheels, your mother's clipped voice issuing instructions. You sit in silence while your maid laces your stays tighter than ever before. Each pull feels like a reminder. You are being shaped into something that fits, whether or not it feels right. When she fastens the final button, you stand before the mirror. You look ethereal, perfect, but the girl reflected there feels miles away from you. Your mother enters, her eyes bright with pride and relief. You look beautiful, my darling, she says, voice trembling ever so slightly. You'll make a fine wife. She means it, and somehow that makes it worse. Tell me, have you ever done everything right and still felt wrong inside? Can beauty ever make captivity bearable? The church bells begin to ring. Outside, carriages line the street like soldiers in formation. Guests in fine clothes step carefully onto cobblestones dusted with white petals. Inside the church, candles glow against cold stone. It smells of beeswax, perfume, and inevitability. You walk down the aisle on your father's arm. His hand is steady. Yours is not. Faces turn toward you, eyes soft with admiration. Every smile feels like a curtain drawn between you and freedom. Then you see him, Charles, waiting at the altar. He looks handsome in his morning coat, composed and dignified. But there's a flicker in his eyes, something you can't quite name. Pity, perhaps, or fear. The vicar's voice rises, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. He speaks words that have been spoken for centuries, words you've rehearsed but never truly heard. Do you promise to love, honor, and obey your husband? The word obey lands like a weight on your chest. You hesitate for just a breath, too quick for anyone to notice, too deep for you to forget. Then you say the only words you're allowed to say. I do. The congregation sighs softly, pleased. Somewhere behind you, your mother begins to cry. Would you promise obedience if the world demanded it? What's the difference between a vow and surrender? The ring slides onto your finger, warm metal, cold meaning. The ceremony ends with polite applause, as though a successful deal has been concluded. You curtsy, you smile, you sign your new name for the first time. Mrs. Charles Whitmore. It doesn't feel like a name. It feels like a disappearance. The wedding breakfast blurs by champagne, congratulations, a chorus of practiced compliments. Your new mother-in-law kisses your cheek and calls you daughter. Your father looks proud. Charles looks content. You look composed. Only the girl inside the white silk knows that something has quietly died. As the day fades, the carriage waits to take you to your new home. The cheers fade behind you, the streets blur past. Inside, the air smells faintly of flowers and anxiety. Charles sits across from you, his expression gentle, almost uncertain. "This must be overwhelming," he says softly. You nod, unable to find words. He reaches out, gloved hand brushing yours. It's a kind gesture, and yet the space between you feels enormous. Outside, twilight deepens. The city lights fade into countryside shadow. You're leaving behind everything you've ever known and stepping into a life already written for you. The carriage stops before Whitmore Hall. The house looms against the sky, stone and ivy, dignified and cold. Servants line the path, faces lowered. You smile mechanically, offering gratitude you don't feel. Inside, candlelight glows across polished wood and heavy velvet. The halls echo faintly, as if even sound treads carefully here. You are shown your room, your chambers, they call it, a space both beautiful and unfamiliar. A grand bed with silk curtains, a fireplace, a dressing table laden with perfumes and hairpins. Every detail whispers of wealth and restraint. Charles stands at the door, hesitating. He looks at you the way one might look at something delicate and expensive. "You must be tired," he says. "Rest if you can." You nod. "And you?" "I'll join you shortly." He leaves you alone with the silence. Would you feel safe in a house that looks like perfection but feels like a museum? Can comfort exist without freedom? You sit on the edge of the bed, unpinning your hair one strand at a time. Each curl falls like a small surrender. Your reflection in the mirror looks calm. A woman, no longer a girl. A wife, no longer herself. When the door finally opens again, the candlelight trembles. Charles enters quietly. He looks nervous, almost shy, and somehow that makes it worse. The moment unfolds exactly as you were warned it would, and nothing like the books ever promised. It isn't violent. It isn't romantic. Simply final. Afterward, he sleeps. You lie awake staring at the ceiling, the sound of your own heartbeat louder than the crackling fire. Somewhere deep inside, you realize this is what it means to be respectable. To be owned gently instead of cruelly. So tell me, would you rather be loved imperfectly or possessed politely? If the price of peace was silence, could you pay it? The first morning of your new life smells faintly of ash and roses. A fire still burns in the grate, low and tired, like it too survived the ceremony. Beside you, Charles sleeps, one arm draped carelessly across the sheets, his breathing steady, peaceful. You study the outline of his face in the dim light, the soft curve of his mouth, the quiet confidence of a man who belongs entirely to the world he inhabits. You envy that ease. You don't have it. You never will. You slip quietly out of bed, bare feet meeting cold marble. Your nightgown whispers around your ankles as you move through the silent room. The mirror catches your reflection, pale skin against pale fabric, hair unpinned and wild. You barely recognize yourself. Last night's events return in fragments, a series of gestures more procedural than passionate. You were prepared for it, told what to expect in vague euphemisms meant to protect your innocence. But nothing prepared you for the hollowness afterward. For the realization that you've crossed a threshold you can never step back over. Tell me, can you feel lonely in a room where someone sleeps beside you? When does closeness become confinement? You pull the curtains aside. Dawn spills across the countryside, fields veiled in mist, the first smoke rising from distant chimneys. Somewhere beyond those hills, life continues unobserved, unjudged. You wonder what it would feel like to wake without an audience. A soft knock startles you. A maid enters with a tray, tea, bread, a folded note. Her eyes stay lowered, trained in obedience. "From Mr. Whitmore," she says quietly. You unfold the note. Neat, careful handwriting. "Forgive my awkwardness last night. I hope this morning finds you well. C.W." You read it twice, unsure whether to feel comforted or insulted. He means well, perhaps. Or perhaps he's simply fulfilling another duty. kindness performed as obligation. You sip the tea, its warmth fading quickly against the chill. Through the window, you see the servants already at work. Men hauling wood, women tending the garden. Even in this new world, life is arranged in layers. Those who command, those who serve, and those, like you, who must appear content. Would an apology make captivity softer? Can politeness disguise possession? At breakfast, the dining hall gleams with ceremony. You wear pale yellow, chosen by your maid because the master prefers lighter tones. The phrase unsettles you, the master. A reminder of where authority lives in this house. Charles stands as you enter, ever the gentleman. He pulls out your chair, pours your tea. He asks about your comfort, your sleep, your impressions of the estate. Every word careful, polite, unthreatening. And yet, beneath it all, there's something you can't ignore. The quiet assumption that this life is yours now. That you will inhabit it, manage it, become it. You answer as you've been taught, gracious, measured, mild. But your heart beats faster when his gaze lingers a moment too long. You can't tell if it's affection or appraisal. Later, the housekeeper gives you a tour. The Whitmore estate stretches endlessly, rooms upon rooms, each one echoing with the ghosts of order and wealth. She explains duties, schedules, expectations. Morning calls, guest lists, servants' rotations, charitable visits. Every hour accounted for, every gesture already prescribed. It's strange, you think, how a woman can command a house but not herself. When you reach the library, you pause. The scent of leather and old paper fills the air, an entire world contained within bindings. You run your fingers across the spines, reading titles you once dreamed of studying freely. Locke, Wollstonecraft, Milton. Books your governess once said were not suitable for ladies. You pull one from the shelf anyway. Inside the cover, an inscription written in fading ink. For those who seek truth, even where it's unwelcome. You stare at the words, the weight of them settling deep in your chest. Someone, long before you, understood. Someone else once lived behind these same walls and refused to be erased. Have you ever discovered someone's secret courage by accident? Could rebellion be inherited like an heirloom? That night, you dine with Charles again. The meal is quiet, almost gentle. He talks of plans for the estate, of business, of the changing season. You nod, ask polite questions, and smile when expected. He seems pleased, not by your insight but by your silence. Later he walks you to your room. At the door he hesitates. "Do you regret this?" he asks softly. For a moment the world goes still. You could tell him the truth, that you don't know what regret even means anymore, that you feel both safe and trapped, seen and invisible. But honesty has no place here. So you smile and say, "Of course not." He kisses your forehead, relieved. When he leaves, you close the door and lean against it, exhaling the lie. Would you tell the truth if it could shatter your only stability? Can affection grow inside obligation, or does it always rot into resentment? You return to the mirror. The ring glints softly on your hand. You turn it once, twice, then slip it off for a moment just to see your skin bare again. It feels lighter. But the mark it leaves, faint, circular, permanent, tells you that even without the gold, you're still bound. You place the ring back on your finger before the maid returns with candles. Because rebellion, for now, must remain invisible. You lie down, staring into the dark ceiling above. Outside, an owl calls from the woods beyond the fields. You close your eyes, listening. The sound feels like a question only you can hear. So tell me, if safety demanded silence, would you keep your voice hidden too? Or would you risk being heard, just once, even if it cost you everything? Morning sunlight floods the grand hall, catching dust motes that swirl like ghosts of former conversations. Whitmore Hall, for all its grandeur, feels less like a home and more like a theater. Every corridor a stage, every room an audience waiting for your next performance. Your new role begins at dawn. Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper, meets you in the corridor with a ledger clutched to her chest. Breakfast at 8, ma'am. Kippers on Tuesday and Friday. Mr. Whitmore takes his tea strong with 1 lump of sugar. Her tone is respectful, but her eyes are sharp, a woman measuring her new mistress with quiet calculation. You nod, pretending competence you don't yet possess. Each instruction feels like a new law written in invisible ink, one you must decipher before you make your first mistake. Tell me, have you ever been promoted to a role you never applied for? What's worse, ignorance or the fear of being found out? You follow her through the labyrinth of corridors. the servants' staircase that smells of soap and coal, the drawing room draped in brocade, the dining room where portraits of long-dead Whitmores stare down with polite disapproval. Every portrait is a reminder, this house belongs to a lineage, not to you. In the kitchen, the cook glances up from kneading dough, her hands dusted white. "What will you have for dinner tonight, ma'am?" she asks. The question, so simple, freezes you. You don't know. You don't even know what Charles likes beyond the vague summary of eggs, bacon, and punctuality. "Roast beef," you answer because it sounds respectable. The cook nods approvingly for now, but her expression tells you she's seen mistresses come and go, all starting with the same timid certainty. You move on to inspect the parlor, the linen cupboards, the servants' quarters. Everywhere you go, people bow, smile, and observe. You're not managing a household, you're being tested by one. Later, you sit in your morning room, a place meant for quiet reflection but filled with invisible expectation. The air smells faintly of lavender and ink. You open the household account book, rows of tidy numbers marching across the page. The previous Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper mentions, checked every entry herself. You feel her ghost sitting beside you, efficient, competent, silently judging your hesitation. You pick up a quill, dip it into ink, and write your first entry. Candles, 2 shillings. Coal, 4. The ink blots slightly. You curse under your breath, and the imperfection feels oddly liberating. Would you rather inherit perfection or start clumsily from scratch? If ghosts of the past watched your every move, would you still act like yourself? At luncheon, Charles joins you. He compliments the food, the arrangement of flowers, even the way the servants move more smoothly than before. You smile, hiding the truth, that every detail was the result of 3 anxious hours and 4 whispered consultations. "I'm impressed," he says kindly. "You're taking to this life well." His praise is meant as comfort, but it lands like confinement. You realize that success in this world means disappearing into it completely. You wonder if he knows how much effort it takes to seem effortless. Afternoon brings the parade of visitors. Ladies from nearby estates, bearing smiles sharp as sewing needles. They praise your gown, your table settings, your husband's prospects. Then they study you with polite curiosity, looking for cracks. Mrs. Turner, the vicar's wife, leans close and whispers, "You'll soon find the rhythm of married life, dear. It's mostly repetition." Her smile doesn't reach her eyes. When they leave, the silence feels heavier than their company. You sit by the window watching the last carriage roll away, the wheels marking the gravel like the passing of hours you can't reclaim. As dusk falls, you visit the garden. The air smells of damp earth and dying roses. You walk the narrow path between hedges, trailing your fingers along the thorns. You think of the other women who walk these same paths. Wives, daughters, servants, each carrying their own quiet burdens. You wonder if any of them ever dreamed of escape. The house behind you glows with light, but you stay in the dark a moment longer, breathing in the chill and the quiet honesty of the evening. Have you ever built a perfect image of peace just to survive inside it? Would you trade freedom for comfort if comfort came with chains you could barely see? When you return indoors, you find Charles in the drawing room, reading by lamplight. He smiles up at you, gentle, polite, grateful. He tells you about his business dealings, his letters from London, the latest parliamentary debate. You nod, you listen, you ask small questions. He seems pleased by your interest. Never realizing that you're performing as much as he is, 2 actors each pretending not to notice the script. Later in bed, you lie awake long after he sleeps. The steady rhythm of his breathing fills the dark, and you think of how many women throughout England are lying awake just like this, feeling both safe and imprisoned at once. You imagine your future stretching out like the long hallways of Whitmore Hall. Beautiful, ordered, endless. So tell me, if comfort were a cage lined with velvet, would you stay inside it forever? Or would you start looking for the hinges in the dark? Time in Whitmore Hall does not pass, it loops. Each day begins with the same rituals: tea, letters, ledgers, polite conversation. Each day ends with the same silence. And somewhere in between, you begin to learn that the true education of a Victorian wife happens not in schools, but in whispers. Mrs. Crawford teaches you without ever meaning to. She never questions Charles's orders, never corrects him, never even seems to raise her voice. But you notice how she controls the rhythm of the household, how every servant moves according to her unspoken cues. She rules the house entirely. And yet, if you asked her who held the power, she'd point upstairs. You start to understand that authority in this world is a performance, and the best actresses are the ones who never break character. Tell me, have you ever realized that silence can be strategy? That obedience, when used wisely, can hide rebellion? You listen carefully to the other women. During afternoon teas and charitable meetings, they speak in coded language. The weather, embroidery, recipes. But beneath those polite topics runs a current of survival advice. Mrs. Peton says, a good wife never contradicts her husband. But what she means is, wait until he's calm to get what you want. Mrs. Turner says, the best marriages are built on patience. What she means is, sometimes waiting is safer than speaking. Mrs. Blackwood, quiet and pale, once remarked softly, it's better to keep certain opinions locked away. You notice the faint bruises beneath her sleeve and understand exactly what kind of opinions she means. The language of women here is an education in disguise. A curriculum written between sighs and teacups. Passed from mouth to ear like forbidden scripture. You learn quickly. In your own household you test these lessons. When Charles forgets to tell you about guests arriving for dinner, you don't show irritation, you adapt. You charm the guests, fill the gaps in conversation. Turn his oversight into an opportunity to appear effortlessly graceful. Later, when he apologizes, you simply smile and say, oh, I rather enjoyed the surprise. He looks relieved, even impressed. And in that small victory, you taste the first quiet thrill of power. Power that looks like patience. Control that hides behind kindness. Would you rather be right or remain safe? Can quiet manipulation ever be a kind of justice? Days blend into weeks. You memorize the house's heartbeat, the creak of the west staircase, the rhythm of the servants' footsteps, the precise moment when Charles's study door opens for evening tea. Every sound teaches you something. Every pause becomes a message. At night, you write small notes in a private book hidden beneath your jewelry box. Not confessions, observations, patterns of behavior. Times when silence worked and times when it didn't. C. Favors gentleness when opposed indirectly. Argument after dinner is useless. Flattery is more effective than logic. You realize you're becoming a strategist, learning to navigate marriage like a general planning a campaign. Have you ever found strength in pretending to be weaker than you are? What if the mask you wear becomes your only protection? Would you ever take it off? Your education deepens when illness visits the village. A fever spreads among the servants' children. The doctor is called for Charles's horses first, then only later for the children. Something in you rebels at the order of concern. You defy etiquette, riding in the carriage to the village alone. You bring food, medicine, blankets. You sit beside coughing mothers who look at you with disbelief. A lady of the manor kneeling on dirt floors. When Charles finds out, his face is unreadable. You mean well, he says slowly, but such appearances can create gossip. People misunderstand when a lady crosses her boundaries. You want to shout that compassion shouldn't have boundaries, that kindness shouldn't need permission. But instead, you lower your gaze and say, of course, my dear. And later that night, you send more supplies under Mrs. Crawford's name instead of your own. You learn that rebellion need not be loud to be real. Would you risk your reputation to help someone who can't repay you? If goodness requires secrecy, is it still good? As months pass, you realize you've stopped waiting to feel happy. Happiness, you decide, isn't the goal. Stability is. And within that stability, small victories become your nourishment. A day without argument, a smile that hides exhaustion, a decision made quietly and carried out without notice. But sometimes, in the late hours when the house sleeps, you stare into the mirror and wonder who you've become. You were once a girl who dreamed of adventure. Now you measure triumph in teaspoons of tolerance. Still, you write in your book before sleep, I am learning to survive beautifully. And you close it with steady hands. So tell me, if you had to choose between truth and peace, which would you wake up for? Which would you let die quietly in the night? Winter arrives softly, a white hush settling over Whitmore Hall, muffling everything but the sound of your own thoughts. Snow clings to the window panes, the world outside pale and still. Inside, the fire burns constantly, a controlled blaze that feels more like duty than warmth. Your days have become perfect. That's what everyone says. The servants admire your composure. Neighbors praise your grace. Charles tells you you're everything a wife should be. You smile. You thank them. But inside you feel hollow, a flawless painting stretched too tightly over a splintering frame. Tell me, have you ever done everything right and still felt like something inside you was quietly dying? Is peace still peace if it costs your voice? Obedience is addictive. It rewards you with calm, with predictability, with the illusion of love. The less you resist, the smoother life becomes, but the smaller you become too. Charles means well. He's gentle, attentive in his own way. He doesn't shout, doesn't strike, doesn't humiliate, but he doesn't ask either. He decides. Always. When you suggest subscribing to a literary journal, he smiles indulgently. My dear, such writings can be unsettling. Best not to clutter your mind with controversy. When you mention missing the piano, he promises to have it tuned, and then forgets. When you question an expense in the accounts, he laughs. You worry too much. Leave such matters to me. He thinks he's protecting you. The world agrees with him. You are supposed to be grateful. One evening, you sit across from him in the drawing room. He reads his newspaper. You embroider. The clock ticks. The fire pops. And suddenly, you realize you haven't spoken more than a handful of words all day. You clear your throat. Charles? He glances up. Yes, my dear? You want to ask him something real. Anything real. Instead, you say, do you like the new curtains? He smiles. Perfectly tasteful. You have such an eye for detail. Then he returns to his paper. You nod, stabbing the needle through silk, wondering when the sound of your own silence became so normal. Would you rather live in gentle quiet, or speak and risk the storm? How long can someone love you if they never actually hear you? The next morning, you receive a letter from your sister, still unmarried, still living freely under your father's roof. Her words are filled with books, opinions, laughter. She writes about attending a lecture on women's education, about arguing with a professor, about being called impertinent and laughing at it. You trace her handwriting with your fingertip. You can almost feel her voice, alive, bold, uncontained. It's like touching sunlight through glass. You set the letter aside and look around your quiet, perfect morning room. The teacup, the ledger, the neatly arranged flowers. Everything in order, everything in its place. And you realize you have become one of the still life paintings you used to admire. Beautiful, lifeless. Later that week, you attend a dinner party. A dozen guests, laughter, polished silver, the familiar theater of manners. Mr. Whitmore dominates the conversation easily, discussing trade, politics, the latest news from London. You listen quietly until one of the gentlemen mentions a new law proposal. Something about property inheritance. You know this topic. You've read about it secretly in the papers. You even have an opinion, a strong one. You open your mouth to speak. But before you can, Charles gently rests his hand over yours. Let's not trouble the ladies with legal matters, he says with a charming smile. The men laugh lightly. The women lower their eyes. You laugh too, because that's what's expected. But when his hand leaves yours, the mark of his touch burns. Not from force, from finality. Have you ever been silenced so politely that it almost felt like affection? What's more dangerous, cruelty or kindness that erases you? That night, you sit by the window long after he's fallen asleep. Outside, the snow glows faintly under the moonlight. You think about how easily he closed your mouth with one gentle sentence. How easily everyone accepted it. How easily you did. You remember the girl who once read forbidden novels under her blankets, who believed that love meant equality, that conversation meant connection. You miss her. You realize she wouldn't recognize this version of herself, this quiet, careful woman whose rebellion is confined to the privacy of her own thoughts. The fire in the grate hisses softly. You whisper into the dark just to hear your own voice again. No one answers. Would you trade love for freedom if you couldn't have both? How much silence can a soul survive before it forgets its own sound? You stand, extinguish the candle, and glance back at the sleeping figure in your bed. He looks peaceful, content. A man convinced his world is exactly as it should be. And maybe it is. For him. For you, it's shrinking. Tomorrow you'll rise and smile again. Pour the tea just right, manage the servants, maintain the illusion. Because that's what good wives do. But somewhere deep inside, something small and silent is beginning to stir. A quiet thought that refuses to die. What if obedience isn't virtue? What if it's just fear wearing a pretty dress? So tell me, if the world applauded your silence, would you clap along? Or start to wonder what would happen if you finally spoke? Spring returns, but you hardly notice. The flowers bloom obediently in Whitmore Hall's gardens. Their colors bright, their order perfect, just like everything else. The roses remind you of yourself, beautiful, curated, trimmed to fit someone else's idea of grace. And yet, something is changing. You've started to notice how the air thickens when certain women gather, how conversation shifts once the men leave the room. A glance exchanged here, a phrase dropped there. It's subtle but unmistakable. A language that doesn't use words. Tell me, have you ever realized a secret world existed right under everyone's nose? Would you dare to step into it if it promised truth, but cost you safety? It begins during a meeting of the Parish Ladies' Charitable Society. The stated purpose is noble, organizing aid for widows and orphans. But the real conversation happens between sips of tea. Mrs. Blackwood mentions her husband's business trips. Mrs. Petton sighs about recurring headaches. Mrs. Turner quietly corrects the record. Headaches are easier to explain than bruises. The room falls silent for a heartbeat. Then someone coughs delicately, and the conversation returns to donations and sewing patterns, as if nothing dangerous had been said at all. You sit frozen, teacup trembling slightly in your hand. In that single exchanged look between women, you feel an entire network come alive. A system of understanding built beneath layers of lace and etiquette. That night, you can't stop thinking about it. How these women survive by turning gossip into communication, charity into cover, obedience into camouflage. Would you recognize rebellion if it wore pearls and smiled sweetly? How many truths are hidden inside polite conversation? A few weeks later, you're invited to Mrs. Petton's garden luncheon. The invitation looks harmless. Cream paper, neat cursive, perfumed faintly with rose water. But the women who attend are not just there for sandwiches and poetry recitations. They sit in small clusters beneath parasols, voices low but steady, hands folded neatly over secrets. Mrs. Petton pours your tea herself and leans close enough for you to smell her perfume, jasmine and something sharper beneath. "Tell me, my dear," she murmurs, "does Mr. Whitmore stay out late often?" The question is innocent in tone, surgical in intent. You blink. "Occasionally. Business," he says. She nods knowingly. "You'll find they all have business eventually. We simply make sure it doesn't become expensive." Her words linger in the air, meaning far more than they say. She's not talking about money. The afternoon drifts on, filled with talk of servants, recipes, the latest scandal from London. But between these topics, messages are passed. Warnings, advice, even comfort. You begin to see how each phrase carries a second meaning. Try chamomile for your nerves means hide the bruises until they fade. He prefers strong tea means watch his temper. She's taken to her bed means her husband has taken too much. You listen, you learn, and for the first time since your wedding day, you feel less alone. Would you rather know a painful truth or live in comfortable ignorance? If survival required deception, could you master the art? Weeks pass. You find yourself becoming part of this quiet alliance, a circle of women who pretend to discuss domestic affairs, but are, in fact, exchanging survival manuals. When Mrs. Turner's husband falls ill, you help arrange her doctor visits. When Mrs. Blackwood sends her maid to borrow medicine, you add a second bottle to the parcel, one she didn't ask for but might need. You start to understand that power in this world doesn't shout. It whispers. It hides inside kindness. It moves like perfume through a closed room, subtle, invisible, unforgettable. And it's contagious. One afternoon, after a particularly tense visit, you find yourself alone with Mrs. Petton in the parlor. The air smells faintly of sugar and secrets. She studies you for a long moment, then says softly, "You're learning. I can see it." "Learning what?" you ask. "How to live without admitting you're surviving," she replies. Then she takes your hand gently. "Never mistake silence for weakness, my dear. It's the most reliable weapon we have." You nod. And for the first time, you understand that survival among Victorian wives isn't passive. It's an art form. Have you ever realized that endurance can look a lot like elegance? That the softest voices often hide the sharpest edges? That evening, you return home to find Charles in his study. He looks up from his papers, smiles, and says, "I'm glad you've made friends among the ladies. They'll teach you propriety." You almost laugh. If only he knew what those proper ladies are really teaching. How to hide evidence, how to trade favors, how to build invisible lifelines between gilded cages. He kisses your hand, grateful for your apparent contentment, completely unaware that your silence is now a choice, not a condition. You go to bed that night feeling the smallest spark of power, a private rebellion made of patience and shared pain. The world still sees you as the perfect wife, but now you know better. Perfection was never safety. It was camouflage. So tell me, if power had to be hidden to survive, would you keep your revolution quiet, or risk letting the world finally hear it? Summer heat presses down on Whitmore Hall like a secret no one dares to speak aloud. The roses wilt early this year, their heads drooping under the weight of too much beauty. You find yourself staring at them often, thinking how easily loveliness becomes exhaustion. The whisper network among the wives still hums quietly in parlors and drawing rooms, but lately the tone has changed. There's something sharper now, a darker undercurrent beneath the lace. A new word begins to circulate, disguised in laughter and lowered voices. Inheritance powder. You first hear it at Mrs. Blackwood's tea. Someone mentions pests in the pantry. Someone else says, "Oh, just a sprinkle of arsenic will fix that." The room goes still for half a heartbeat. Then the conversation resumes as though nothing extraordinary has been said. You sip your tea, pretending to admire the biscuits, but the phrase echoes inside you like a bell struck once and still ringing. Tell me, have you ever heard a sentence so ordinary that it frightened you? Would you recognize danger if it wore a smile? Later, when the guests leave, Mrs. Blackwood lingers by the window, fingers tracing the lace curtain as if testing its strength. Her voice is calm, almost tender. They call it inheritance powder because it restores what's rightfully yours. You don't respond. You don't have to. The look in her eyes says everything. This isn't gossip anymore. It's instruction. That night, you lie awake listening to the wind against the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls. You wonder if this is what power feels like in a world that denies you every other form of it. Not grand, not glorious, but secret, slow, and terribly patient. Would you ever use the tools of your oppression to reclaim your freedom? If justice were forbidden, would revenge start to look holy? In the weeks that follow, you start to notice details you'd missed before. At Mrs. Turner's luncheons, the men always drink first. At Mrs. Petton's, the tea is poured from her own hand, never the maid's. And when someone asks after Mrs. Hamilton's husband, no one answers directly. Only a polite murmur, "He's resting now." Resting. The most useful word in the Victorian vocabulary. You begin to understand that among women like you, mercy has been replaced by mathematics. How much humiliation equals 1 teaspoon? How many apologies justify a pinch? How many nights of bruises add up to the final measure? The wives don't kill for passion. They kill for equilibrium. The knowledge spreads in code. A conversation about flower arrangements becomes a lesson in dosage. A recipe swap hides careful advice about timing. A story about rat poison for the pantry carries a quiet reminder. Never serve yourself first. The irony is perfect. Society has trained women to be graceful caretakers, and now that very skill, attending, measuring, nurturing, becomes the perfect camouflage for destruction. You never ask questions. You only listen. And yet each story leaves a trace in your mind, like powder settling at the bottom of a glass. Would you keep a secret that could save your life, even if it could also take one? If knowledge itself became dangerous, would you stop learning? One evening, as you prepare tea for Charles, you catch yourself staring at the sugar bowl. Its fine white grains glitter in the candlelight, innocent as snow. For just a moment, your imagination flickers, and you see yourself stirring something else into his cup. Something invisible, something absolute. The thought vanishes as quickly as it came, but the guilt that follows is immediate and sharp. You feel monstrous, and then quietly relieved, because now you understand something terrible and true. To survive here, you must know the darkness, even if you never use it. You carry the tea to him carefully. He thanks you, kisses your hand, returns to his reading. You watch him sip, and you realize he'll never know how much control you hold in that single moment. He thinks he owns you. He's wrong. Have you ever felt power simply because you could act, even when you didn't? Is restraint a kind of revenge? The next week, Mrs. Petton's husband dies suddenly. A stomach ailment, the doctor says. The funeral is dignified, tasteful, quiet. She wears black silk and carries herself like a woman finally breathing air she'd been denied for years. No one accuses her. No one dares. At the wake, she takes your hand and whispers, "Freedom doesn't always arrive dressed as forgiveness." You don't respond, but when you meet her eyes, she smiles faintly, as if she knows you understand. And you do. You wish you didn't, but you do. That night, you write a single line in your hidden diary. Even angels, when trapped long enough, learn the taste of arsenic. You close the book, your hands trembling not with fear, but with recognition. So tell me, would you rather remain innocent in chains, or guilty with a key in your hand? Autumn creeps back into Whitmore Hall, carrying the scent of smoke and endings. The leaves turn, fall, and disappear, much like the men whose ailments have begun to make quiet headlines in the neighboring counties. Whispers drift faster than the wind now. So many stomachs upset. So many respectable husbands dying peacefully. And the wives, all so composed, so refined, so calm at the funerals. Even the gossip columns are cautious, using delicate language. A season of unfortunate illness among the gentry, one writes. A reminder of life's fragility, says another. But beneath the ink, everyone can read the same unspoken question. How many of these deaths are truly natural? Tell me, if a lie became the only shield against cruelty, would you learn to love its weight? Would you rather confess your truth or live safely behind the world's silence? At first, you think you're imagining it. The watchful glances at tea parties. The extra pause before someone accepts a drink. Even Charles grows wary, sniffing at his cup as though the tea might speak. He jokes about it at dinner. "You've heard the talk, haven't you?" he says lightly. "Every man in the county afraid of his own pudding." You smile, carefully, perfectly, and answer, "Well, perhaps they should have been kinder husbands." He laughs, assuming you're teasing. You aren't. That night, as you brush your hair before bed, he stands behind you in the mirror. "You wouldn't harm me, would you?" he says softly, smiling as though it's a joke. You meet his reflection's eyes and reply, "Only if you deserved it." He chuckles, kisses your shoulder, and walks away. But for the first time, you see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Feels like power, and it feels terrifying. Have you ever been trusted by someone who didn't realize how dangerous that trust could be? Would you rather be feared or forgotten? The whisper network begins to fray. Too many secrets, too many accidents. Mrs. Blackwood avoids public gatherings now. Mrs. Turner claims a nervous condition. And Mrs. Petton, the one whose husband died last month, has started giving away her jewelry, as though she's shedding the last pieces of a life she can't justify keeping. During a visit, she takes your hands in hers. Her skin feels cold, waxen. "We've done what we had to," she murmurs. But God doesn't forgive practicality. You want to argue, to tell her that survival isn't sin, that the world forced this upon you, but the words catch in your throat. You see the tremor in her fingers, the sleeplessness in her eyes. She's not afraid of being discovered. She's afraid of remembering. And suddenly you understand. Every secret has a cost, and some debts cannot be buried with the dead. That evening you attend church. The vicar's sermon is about forgiveness. He speaks of mercy, of endurance, of the quiet nobility of suffering. The wives sit perfectly still, faces serene, eyes hollow. The men nod approvingly, confident that the message is for their wives, never suspecting it's a eulogy for themselves. When the service ends, Mrs. Turner leans close to you and whispers, "Every sermon about forgiveness sounds like mockery now, doesn't it?" You don't answer. You can't, because she's right. Would you rather be guilty and alive or innocent and invisible? Can morality survive inside a cage? At home, you find a new kind of quiet in the house. Charles works later each night. His laughter sounds thinner. The servants move more carefully, their footsteps soft, their eyes lowered. Even the air feels cautious. One evening, he mentions traveling to London for business. You nod politely, but inside you feel an ache you can't name. Not fear, not loneliness, almost disappointment. For so long, you've defined yourself by endurance. Now you realize endurance has made you hollow. You've built an identity out of survival, but survival too can become its own prison. That night, you open your diary, your one honest witness. The pages have grown heavier, the ink darker, as if it absorbs not just your words but your conscience. You write slowly. Power learned in captivity is never innocent. Each choice I didn't make still stains my hands. Then you close the book and stare at your reflection. You look strong, elegant, untouchable. The perfect image of Victorian grace. But you know the truth. There are ghosts in your silence now. Not dead men, dead versions of yourself. Tell me, how many parts of you would you trade to stay safe? If every secret carved away a piece of your soul, how long before there was nothing left to protect? The clock strikes midnight. Somewhere deep inside the house, the pipes moan, a sound like a sigh from another century. Charles stirs in his sleep beside you. You lie awake, watching the candle burn down to nothing. You think of Mrs. Petton's trembling hands, of Mrs. Blackwood's silence, of every woman who has smiled her way through a nightmare. You realize this: the perfect life was never about love. It was about control. And now that control has begun to slip, not from your hands, but from theirs. The question that haunts you is no longer what if. It's how much longer. So tell me, if freedom demanded a price you could never publicly pay, would you still buy it? And if you did, how would you ever sleep again? The first frost returns before you realize summer ever left. The gardens turn gray, the hedges brittle. Each morning, the cold seeps into the halls of Whitmore like an uninvited guest, polite, persistent, impossible to ignore. The fireplaces roar, but the warmth never quite reaches your bones anymore. You start to write again, not to remember but to bear witness. The diary that once served as a confidant becomes something else entirely. A ledger of hidden truths. A quiet archive of everything respectable society insists never happens. The ink feels heavier now. Each stroke carries weight, the burden of women's voices too long suppressed. You write in careful, looping letters, the same kind you were taught as a girl in finishing school. But the content would make any governess faint. Mrs. Blackwood, husband deceased, doctor called too late. Mrs. Petton, unwell, sleepless, visits churchyard often. Mrs. Turner, husband's temper worsening, she hides bruises beneath lace. You document not from malice, but from necessity. You realize that no one else will ever tell these stories. No man will ever write the truth of what happens behind respectable doors. So you will. Tell me, if no one believed your suffering, would you start to write proof for ghosts instead of people? Have you ever kept a secret so long it began to feel like scripture? Each night, after the servants retire and Charles drifts into his predictable sleep, you pull the diary from its hiding place beneath the jewelry box. Your true inheritance, not the pearls or gowns. You write by candlelight, careful not to let the wax drip onto the pages, because you want it perfect. Someday someone will find this book, and when they do, they must understand exactly what you endured, and what you became. Sometimes you catch yourself describing not just the events but the emotions you're not supposed to have. Jealousy, anger, desire, disgust. These too are evidence that you are human in a world that insists you shouldn't be. You begin to include coded details, the way other women did before you. Dates replaced with flowers, names with initials, dangers hidden behind metaphors. A husband's violence becomes thunder, his apologies, the rain. A friend's slow revenge, a change of season. The language feels safer this way, as if poetry could protect truth from discovery. But sometimes as your pen moves, you wonder if you're writing for posterity or for absolution. Would you rather be remembered as guilty but honest, or innocent and erased? If your story could only be told after you were gone, would you still tell it? Weeks pass. Charles grows preoccupied with work again, or perhaps with someone else. You no longer ask. His absence feels like mercy now. When he's away, the house breathes differently. Your thoughts expand to fill the empty spaces he leaves behind. You spend those hours writing, furiously, fearlessly. What begins as a private record transforms into something more deliberate. You start writing not to yourself but for someone else. You imagine a young woman years from now, finding these pages and realizing she's not alone. That even in the age of silks and manners, someone saw, felt, and fought, even if quietly. That thought keeps you steady. It gives your suffering purpose. One evening as you write, you hear footsteps outside your door. You freeze. The handle turns slightly, then stops. A moment later, it's gone. Your pulse hammers. When Charles appears later, you watch his face carefully. He says nothing, but his eyes linger on your desk too long. You move the diary to a new hiding place that night, inside the false bottom of a sewing chest, beneath folded linen. From then on, you write more cautiously, but you never stop. The act of writing becomes defiance itself. Each sentence a small rebellion whispered into eternity. Have you ever risked everything just to feel heard, even if no one was listening yet? If your truth could destroy your peace, would you still speak it to the page? One rainy afternoon, Mrs. Turner visits unexpectedly. Her eyes look hollow, her voice barely a whisper. She confides that her husband has fallen gravely ill. You pour tea, offer sympathy, and quietly note how her hands no longer tremble when she speaks. Before she leaves, she squeezes your hand and murmurs, "Write it down, won't you? All of it. So they'll know we weren't mad. We were cornered." You nod. You promise. And later that night you do. You record everything. Not as gossip, as testimony. The truth, written in silence, still counts as truth. When you close the book, your hands are steady. You realize you've crossed an invisible threshold. You're no longer documenting tragedy. You're curating evidence for future strength. So tell me, if the only weapon left to you was your story, would you use it quietly? Or would you make sure it was found when the world was finally ready to listen? The first rumor arrives before the woman herself does. The new vicar's wife, the servant's whisper, is rather peculiar. She speaks her mind. She wears her hair loosely. She looks men in the eye when she talks to them. You dismiss the gossip at first. Every village needs its scandal to stay awake through winter. But then Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison arrives, and the gossip suddenly feels like understatement. You meet her one Sunday after service. She walks into the parish hall like someone unaware she's expected to shrink. Her posture is straight, her eyes bright, her voice steady. When she's introduced, she doesn't curtsy. She offers her hand. And when she looks at you, it feels like being seen. Not evaluated, not measured, simply seen. Tell me, have you ever met someone whose presence made you remember who you used to be? Would you trust that feeling, or run from it? Mrs. Morrison joins your table during tea, ignoring the delicate hierarchy that dictates where newcomers should sit. The other wives stiffen, their smiles strained. You half expect her to apologize. She doesn't. Instead, she begins talking, not about dresses or dinners, but about books. She quotes from a pamphlet on reform, mentions a parliamentary debate about education for poor women. Her words are confident, unhurried, alive. The men across the room glance over, amused. The women glance down, uneasy. Then she turns to you. "What do you think, Mrs. Whitmore?" You freeze, your cup halfway to your lips. No one has asked your opinion in years. Not about anything that matters. The question hits you like a forgotten melody, familiar and foreign at once. I haven't considered it closely, you say. Charles follows such matters more attentively. She tilts her head, studying you. "I'm sure you have thoughts of your own. You seem the kind who observes more than she admits." The statement feels less like a compliment and more like a key turning in a locked door. Would you answer honestly if it meant breaking the quiet that keeps you safe? Can curiosity feel dangerous when you've lived too long without it? After that first meeting, Mrs. Morrison begins visiting regularly. She always arrives with a purpose: to discuss a charity, a sermon, a new book. But beneath those pretexts lies something deeper, conversation that matters. She asks questions that make you think in ways you'd forgotten were possible. About fairness, about education, about marriage. And she listens, truly listens, to your answers. It feels intoxicating at first, like remembering a language you thought you'd forgotten. A part of you, long dormant, begins to stir again. One afternoon during tea she says, "My husband believes a woman's mind is her greatest virtue. I suspect it terrifies the parish." You smile despite yourself. Men fear what they don't understand. "Then we should make it our duty to educate them," she replies, eyes gleaming. The words make you laugh. A sound so sudden and unfamiliar that you almost startle yourself. It feels like sunlight breaking through clouded glass. That evening, when Charles asks about your day, you find yourself mentioning Mrs. Morrison's visit. He listens politely but frowns slightly. A bold sort of woman by all accounts. You do well not to imitate her manners. You nod as you always do, but your mind is already elsewhere, in a room filled with ideas and forbidden laughter. Have you ever been warned away from the very thing that makes you feel alive? Would you obey, or listen to the pulse that says, "Not this time"? Soon you and Mrs. Morrison begin exchanging books. carefully chosen ones. Essays, poems, letters written by women whose names society tries to forget. Each new book feels like contraband, each idea like a match struck in darkness. Through her, you hear about women who dared to speak. Caroline Norton, who fought for legal rights after her husband destroyed her life. Frances Power Cobbe, who argued that wives should own their own property. Barbara Lee Smith Bodishin, who lived and wrote as freely as any man. You stay up late reading their words by candlelight, heart pounding with a strange mix of envy and awe. It's like opening your own diary and finding it written centuries ago by someone else. Would you rather live safely in ignorance or risk ruin for the chance to awaken? If knowledge could burn your carefully built world, would you still strike the match? By spring, Mrs. Morrison has gathered a small circle of women. Not the whisper network of secrets, but something bolder. A society of thought disguised as charity. You meet in drawing rooms under the pretense of discussing parish donations. But what's really exchanged are ideas. Dangerous, exhilarating ideas. And one afternoon, Mrs. Morrison says the words that change everything. We cannot always remain grateful for our cages, no matter how gilded they are. The room falls silent. You feel something electric move through you. Not fear, but recognition. The kind of truth that once heard cannot be unlearned. That night you return home changed. Charles is asleep when you enter. You light a candle and open your diary. Your hand trembles as you write. Today, I met a woman who reminded me I am not furniture. You blow out the flame, but its glow remains inside you, flickering behind your ribs. Impossible to extinguish now that you've remembered what light feels like. So tell me, if someone handed you the key to your own mind after years of silence, would you turn it? And if you did, what would you be brave enough to say next? The seasons roll forward again, and with them your courage. Whitmore Hall remains unchanged, orderly, polished, and suffocatingly calm. But inside you, something restless has begun to stir. A hunger that no amount of obedience can quiet anymore. Mrs. Morrison fans that quiet fire each time she visits. You talk about politics now, about the price of bread, about parliament, about the cruel poetry of laws written by men who have never known hunger or childbirth. One afternoon, while arranging flowers, she says lightly, "The London Gazette prints letters from readers. Anonymous ones. Sometimes even from women." You glance up sharply. She meets your gaze with a smile that's almost conspiratorial. Anonymity, my dear, is freedom's first disguise. That night, the idea follows you to bed. It haunts your dreams like a door you've never dared to open. Tell me, have you ever kept an idea hidden so long that when it finally surfaced, it felt alive? Would you risk everything just to make your thoughts visible? Days pass, but the thought refuses to fade. You begin to draft sentences in your head while performing your daily tasks. Arranging flowers, greeting guests, supervising servants. Each phrase feels like contraband. You rehearse it silently while smiling across dinner tables. When you finally sit at your desk, candle burning low, you dip your pen into ink and begin. To the editor, "Sir, I write not from anger but from observation. Among respectable wives, there exists a quiet epidemic not of illness, but of suffocation." The words pour faster than you expect. You write about the limitations placed upon women, about the hypocrisy of laws that demand virtue while denying justice, about the silent erasure of wives who think, read, and ache beyond their drawing rooms. You end it with a single line. "We are not angels, we are architects, building lives from the ruins of restraint." Then you sign it simply, "A lady of the parish." You fold the paper carefully, seal it with plain wax, and hide it inside your writing case. Your hands tremble, but it isn't fear anymore, it's adrenaline. Would you rather whisper the truth to one friend or shout it to strangers who may never know your name? If your words could outlive you, would you dare to send them into the world? The next morning you mail the letter. You tell no one, not even Mrs. Morrison. Not yet. For the next 2 weeks, you live between heartbeat and silence, half terrified, half thrilled, until the newspaper arrives. You almost drop it when you see your words printed there. Your phrases arranged neatly beneath the anonymous signature. They look so calm, so composed, as though they belong to someone braver than you. Charles reads it at breakfast, frowning thoughtfully. "Strong opinions these days," he mutters. "Some lady clearly needs more hobbies." You sip your tea and murmur, "Indeed." He never suspects, but the fire has already begun. 2 days later, Mrs. Morrison arrives at your door. The paper folded in her gloved hand, her eyes bright with recognition. "Was it you?" she asks, voice low but charged. You don't answer, not directly. Instead, you smile and say, "It seems women are finally finding their tongues." She laughs, a rich, honest laugh that fills the parlor like sunlight. "Then let's keep them talking." From that day forward, you write more. Letters about education, about the cruelty of coverture laws, about the invisible prisons built from good manners. Each one you sign with a different pseudonym. Each one travels farther than you ever have. Have you ever realized that courage isn't loud, it's persistent? Would you still write if the world promised never to listen? Soon, other women begin to write too. Mrs. Turner, Mrs. Petton. Even timid Mrs. Blackwood sends a timid line to the editor. A small seed of defiance disguised as gratitude for reform. The vicar frowns in his sermons, complaining that the modern female grows dangerously opinionated. You and Mrs. Morrison exchange amused glances from your pew. You both know the truth. There's no stopping what's already begun. Your letters start to circulate beyond the parish. A friend of a friend sends one to London. It appears in a pamphlet about the moral duties of wives and husbands. No one knows who wrote it, and yet every woman who reads it recognizes herself inside the lines. At night, you stand by your window, the wind tugging softly at the curtains, and you whisper into the dark, "I am not invisible anymore." For the first time, those words don't sound like rebellion. They sound like truth. So tell me, if your words could travel farther than your feet ever could, would you chase them into the unknown? And if they burned the world behind you, would you let them burn? At first, the change is almost invisible. A new glint in Charles's eyes at breakfast. A sharper tone when he speaks your name. You tell yourself it's nothing, that the tension in the air is just the coming winter. But you know better. You've lit a fire, and now the smoke has reached the ceiling. 3 letters have appeared in print since your first one, each more daring, each written with the kind of honesty you never speak aloud. And while no one can prove they're yours, Whitmore Hall seems to hum with suspicion anyway. Charles begins reading the newspaper aloud again, a habit he'd abandoned years ago. Now, he lingers on the columns signed "A Lady of the Parish." "This woman," he says one morning, "has a dangerous mind, clever but clearly misguided. Her words give other women ideas." You stir your tea slowly. "Perhaps ideas are not the danger," you say quietly. He looks at you for a moment, puzzled by the tone. Then he laughs. "You always did enjoy your little turns of phrase." He doesn't notice the slight tremor in your hand, not from fear but from restraint. "Tell me, have you ever hidden the truth in plain sight, waiting to see if someone you love will recognize it? Would you be disappointed if they never did?" Outside, the gossip grows louder. The vicar denounces unfeminine writers in his Sunday sermon. The ladies at tea begin dissecting every anonymous letter, speculating about its author as though she were some mythical creature. Mrs. Petton smiles faintly over her teacup. "She must be one of us," she says. "Only someone who's lived the life could write with such precision." Mrs. Turner leans closer. "Or perhaps she's one of you," she adds, eyes glinting toward you. You smile politely. "Surely I haven't the imagination." They all laugh. But beneath the laughter, the tension sharpens like glass. It's no longer about gossip. It's about who will be brave enough to stop pretending. You confide in Mrs. Morrison finally. Her reaction is immediate, joy, pride, and fear tangled together. "Oh, my dear," she whispers, gripping your hands. "You've done something remarkable. But be cautious. They will forgive cruelty long before they forgive truth." Her warning proves prophetic. A week later, Charles returns from London with the newspaper folded under his arm. He doesn't look at you when he sets it down beside your plate. The front page bears a letter, your words, your phrasing, copied and discussed by a London journalist who calls it a remarkable female intellect hiding behind propriety. He speaks while cutting his meat. This woman has gone too far now. She implies that the law itself favors cruelty, that marriage should be reformed, that wives deserve independence. He looks up, his gaze direct. What do you think of such nonsense? Your pulse pounds in your throat. You want to say everything, the truth, the reason, the ache that birthed the words. Instead, you smile faintly. "I think she's very brave." The silence that follows stretches like a rope pulled too tight. He sets down his knife and fork carefully. Then softly. Sometimes bravery and folly look the same. You nod. Yes, you whisper. From certain angles. Would you tell the truth if it meant breaking the life that keeps you fed? If freedom cost you your home, your safety, your name, would you still want it? From that evening on, his tone changes. Not cruel, not violent, but careful. Measured. As though every conversation might be a trap. He starts asking where you go, who you seek, what you read. And you realize with quiet horror that you've become the thing Victorian men fear most. A woman with private thoughts. Mrs. Morrison urges you to lie low. Stop writing for a while, she says. Let them forget. But you can't. The words are no longer a choice, they're a pulse. So you write again. A new letter, softer, disguised as reflection. But Charles finds it before it leaves the house. He doesn't shout. He doesn't strike. He only holds it, staring at the handwriting he knows too well. I see, he says finally. Then after a long pause, is this what I am to you? A cage. You meet his gaze. I never meant for you to read it, you say truthfully. He nods once, folding the paper with surgical precision. I know. And then he leaves the room, closing the door behind him so quietly that it's almost worse than if he'd slammed it. That night you sit by the fire. The letter gone, the silence absolute. You realize there is no going back. He knows. The world will know soon enough. But oddly you feel no fear. Just a strange, liberating sadness. You whisper into the dark. I have spoken. That is enough. So tell me, if the truth destroyed your peace, but gave you back your reflection, would you still choose it? The morning after he finds the letter, the house feels colder. Not physically, the fires burn as always, the servants move quietly through their routines. But there's a chill that settles in the spaces between footsteps and silence. You can feel it in the way the breakfast table is set, in the absence of his usual small talk, in the deliberate way Charles avoids meeting your eyes. He doesn't mention the letter again. Not at breakfast, not at dinner. But his silence speaks in fluent accusation. Days stretch like thin ice over deep water. You walk carefully, afraid to make a sound that might cause everything to crack. Each polite word feels like a performance. Each glance a test you're not sure you're passing. You write nothing new for a week, then two. Your ink dries in its bottle. Your hands itch for paper, for freedom. You tell yourself you can stop. You can go back. But you know it's a lie. Tell me, have you ever tried to unknow something once it's been spoken? Could you return to silence after hearing your own voice? One evening he finally speaks. The firelight paints his face in gold and shadow. He looks calm, but his voice carries the weight of something practiced. Like a man preparing to deliver a verdict. I've written to my solicitor, he says. You freeze. He continues. I'm told there's no law preventing a wife from writing letters under a false name. Pause. But there are consequences nonetheless. He folds his hands. Do you understand what you've done? You've made me appear a fool among my peers. People whisper that I cannot control my own household. The word control lands heavier than the rest. You watch him struggle to maintain composure. His pride wounded more deeply than his affection. Charles, you begin softly. I never meant to shame you. He laughs, not cruelly but bitterly. Shame me? My dear, you've done worse. You've embarrassed me. There it is. Not anger. Not betrayal. Embarrassment, the cardinal sin of the English gentleman. Would you rather be loved as someone's possession or despised as yourself? If respect must come at the cost of truth, is it worth keeping? I married a sensible woman, he says. Not a writer of manifestos. You flinch at the word. Manifesto, as though your thoughts were treason, your sentences dynamite. He stands pacing by the fireplace. Do you imagine you understand the world? That your little circle of women can fix what Parliament itself struggles with? You've let ideas infect you. His words are sharper now, each one cutting away another thin layer of patience. I could have you removed from the society of those women, he says finally. Sent to stay with your sister in Bath. Quietly. Respectably. You meet his gaze. And what then, you ask? I would still think. Still write, even if only in my head. He exhales sharply, as though your honesty offends him more than rebellion itself. I don't want to punish you, he says. I only want my wife back. The words should comfort you. Instead they ache. Because the wife he wants, the silent, grateful, obedient wife, no longer exists. That night, the storm finally breaks. Rain lashes against the windows, wind rattles the shutters, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls like judgment. You lie awake, listening to the tempest outside, and to the quieter one within. Charles's breathing beside you is steady, heavy with exhaustion. You turn toward the window, watching lightning illuminate the room for split seconds at a time. Each flash shows you fragments of yourself reflected in the mirror. The calm face, the folded hands, the eyes that no longer look afraid. Would you weather the storm to protect your peace, or surrender it to keep your home still? If thunder came to break the silence, would you open the window, or close the curtains? The next morning, something shifts again, not in him but in you. You rise earlier than usual. You walk through the corridors that once felt like a gilded maze, and they seem smaller now, manageable, human. At the breakfast table, Charles sits waiting, his newspaper folded neatly. Neither of you speaks. The silence has changed form. No longer cold, but strangely neutral, like the pause between acts of a play. He looks up once. "I shall be in London for a week," he says simply. You nod. Safe travels. When the carriage finally pulls away from Whitmore Hall, you stand by the window watching the wheels sink into the muddy road. You don't feel relief. You feel space. You walk to your desk, open the drawer, take out a clean sheet of paper, dip your pen into the ink, and you begin again. To the editor, "Sir, they say storms cleanse the air. Perhaps they cleanse souls too. So tell me, when the storm finally comes to your life, will you curse it for breaking your peace, or thank it for showing you what was real all along?" For the first time in years, the house feels yours. No footsteps in the corridor. No voice asking where you've been, what you're doing, why you're smiling to yourself. Just silence, not the suffocating kind, but the kind that breathes. Freedom wrapped in the scent of rain and paper. You write every morning now. Not for him. Not even for the world. For yourself. To remember, to witness, to stay alive. Mrs. Morrison visits often, bringing news, pamphlets, rumors. The letters, your letters, are spreading. Women in nearby parishes have begun writing too. They sign their pieces a wife, a mother, a woman who remembers. Each one is different, but they all sound like echoes of your own heart. You've started something, Mrs. Morrison tells you one afternoon, her smile bright but wary. Something they can't stop now. Tell me, have you ever seen a secret grow until it becomes a movement? Would you feel pride or fear? The local ladies' society meets again, this time under the pretext of organizing a charity for widows. You arrive early. The parlor smells of tea and starch and the faint nervousness of women who know they're about to do something improper. Mrs. Petton greets you with a knowing look. Mrs. Turner, her wrist hidden beneath lace cuffs, pours tea with trembling hands. Even quiet Mrs. Blackwood, who never speaks above a whisper, has brought a notebook. The meeting begins as usual with polite talk about donations and parish events. Then Mrs. Morrison closes the parlor door. The air changes. The laughter fades. No one needs to say what this really is. You spread out copies of your most recent letter, one that argues, gently but firmly, that women should have the right to their own property, that charity is not enough when the system itself breeds suffering. Mrs. Turner reads aloud, voice quivering. "We cannot remain content with gratitude for crumbs when the table was built with our labor." Her voice breaks slightly. You see her eyes glisten. Then she says very softly, "I didn't know anyone else felt this way." And suddenly the room comes alive. Mrs. Blackwood speaks next, her words barely above a whisper. She tells you about the bruises, about the doctor who refused to treat her without her husband's permission. Mrs. Petton admits she's been saving coins secretly for years. A small fund in case I ever need to disappear. They speak cautiously at first, but soon the caution gives way to something deeper. Relief. Connection. The dangerous joy of being understood. Have you ever been in a room where truth feels like oxygen? Can you imagine how powerful it is to breathe freely for the first time? You listen, you share, you write. Together, the women begin drafting their own anonymous letters. Each one a confession, a warning, a spark. Mrs. Morrison suggests sending them through different towns to avoid suspicion. Mrs. Turner volunteers to distribute them through her cousin in London. The plan forms easily, naturally, like a pattern that was always meant to exist. You call it, half-jokingly, the Society of Silent Voices. But the name sticks. When the meeting ends, no one rushes to leave. The women linger, touching hands, exchanging glances that say what they can't speak aloud. We are not alone anymore. Outside, the evening light turns everything gold, a soft defiance against the grayness that used to rule your days. You walk home with your notebook clutched close to your chest. Each page inside it feels like a heartbeat. Charles returns from London 3 days later. He's quieter now, watchful, uncertain of what he's coming home to. You greet him as you always have, gently, politely, but there's something new in your voice. A calm that isn't submission, a steadiness that isn't fear. He notices. He doesn't comment. He doesn't have to. That night, as you undress for bed, you catch your reflection in the mirror. You look older, wiser perhaps, but something else has changed too. There's a spark in your eyes again. The same one you saw in Mrs. Morrison's the first day you met her. Would you recognize yourself after years of silence? If strength returned in a whisper, would you trust it to become a roar? Over the following weeks, the movement grows quietly. Letters spread from village to town to city. Some are printed. Some are confiscated. But the words keep finding their way through. A London newspaper calls it the voice of the respectable rebellion. Men scoff at it in clubs. Women discuss it in drawing rooms, pretending not to care too much. But you know what's really happening? A slow awakening, unstoppable now that it's begun. Mrs. Morrison visits again, bringing a new pamphlet. Inside it, a familiar phrase catches your eye. Your own words. Reprinted, rephrased, reborn. We are not angels, we are architects. She looks at you, smiling. You see, she says. They're listening. You nod, but you already know. You felt it in the air for weeks. The hum of something bigger than any one woman. That night, as you lie beside your sleeping husband, you whisper a prayer, not of repentance but of gratitude. For paper. For courage. For the sisterhood that made you visible again. So tell me, if your voice joined 1,000 others, would you speak louder or softer? And if history itself began to listen, what would you dare to say next? You should have known the silence wouldn't last. Movements, even quiet ones, make noise, and noise draws attention. The first sign comes in whispers at the Sunday service. The vicar's sermon, usually predictable, turns sharp, condemning women who mistake disobedience for courage. His words drip with moral certainty. His gaze finds you just briefly, long enough for everyone else to notice. Later, as the congregation files out, Mrs. Turner squeezes your hand. "He means us," she whispers. You manage a small smile. "I know. Tell me, have you ever been called wicked for simply wanting to be free? Would you stand your ground, or bow your head to survive?" By Monday, the rumors reach your doorstep. A letter arrives, unsigned but unmistakably venomous. A lady should know her place. God made women for obedience, not opinion. Your writings bring shame to decent families. You read it once, twice, then fold it neatly and place it in your diary. It deserves to be remembered, proof that truth unsettles the comfortable. When Charles finds you that evening, his expression is grim. "I've received inquiries from my associates," he says. "They ask whether my wife is among these scribbling women." His voice trembles, not with rage but with humiliation. "Are you?" he asks. You look up from your embroidery. "Yes." He stares at you as though you've just confessed a crime. "Do you understand what you're risking?" You nod. Finally, yes. The days that follow feel like walking a tightrope over fire. Every knock at the door makes your heart lurch. You hear of pamphlets burned, meetings broken up, husbands forbidding wives from attending gatherings. One woman, Mrs. Davies, barely 20, is sent away to her father's house for moral correction. Another is quietly institutionalized, her husband declaring her hysterical. The newspapers mock you all as petticoat philosophers. But every insult, every sermon, every threat only feeds the cause. The women don't stop. They meet in smaller groups now. In kitchens, in gardens, in the corners of sewing circles. Needles and teacups become camouflage for revolution. Would you still fight for freedom if no one ever thanked you for it? If victory meant being erased from history, would you still give your name? Charles withdraws further into silence. He doesn't forbid you to write, not openly. But he begins staying out later, spending his evenings at the club where men reassure each other. That order will soon be restored. When he returns, his tone has changed. "Do you even know what you're asking for?" he says one night. Equality sounds noble, but it will destroy everything that keeps society stable. You meet his gaze across the room, the firelight flickering between you like an unspoken challenge. Maybe what you call stability is only fear with better manners. He looks away first. A week later, Mrs. Morrison's husband delivers his own sermon, a thunderous condemnation of women corrupted by pride. You watch from the pew as Mrs. Morrison sits perfectly still beside him, her face composed, her hands folded tight in her lap. She doesn't move. She doesn't blink. But her silence feels louder than any protest. After the service, you find her in the churchyard, standing beneath the bare branches of an elm. He knows, she says quietly, about the meetings, about the letters. What will you do, you ask? She smiles faintly. What I've always done. Continue. That night you write again, this time not to a newspaper, but to the women themselves. A letter of courage, a message to be copied and shared in secret. They will try to frighten us back into silence. But silence is where we nearly died. We will not return there. You pass the letter to Mrs. Turner the next morning. She presses it to her chest as though it were a prayer. Have you ever realized that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more? Would you keep walking forward even if the road ended in fire? By spring, you begin to see cracks not just in society, but in the men themselves. A few, quietly, cautiously, begin to listen. One writes to the paper defending the right of women to speak. Another funds a school for girls in the next town. Change is slow, imperfect, fragile, but it's real. Charles says nothing more about your writing, but you notice something different in his eyes now. Not approval, not forgiveness, recognition. He sees you, perhaps for the first time, not as his reflection, but as a force he can neither command nor contain. That night, as the lamps burn low, you close your diary and whisper, "They are afraid of us because we have learned to stop apologizing." And for once, the thought brings not sorrow, but peace. So tell me, when the world finally begins to tremble under your voice, will you speak softer out of pity, or louder because you know you were right all along? By summer, the movement has outgrown its secrecy. What began as letters passed between wives in drawing rooms has become something London itself cannot ignore. The newspapers still mock you, of course, calling you ink-stained angels and ladies with delusions of philosophy. But the tone has changed. Mockery is always the final mask fear wears before it breaks. In Parliament, an MP named Whitfield stands and reads from one of your letters, not knowing who wrote it, not knowing the ink came from your very desk at Whitmore Hall. "We do not seek to unmake men," he reads aloud, "only to make women visible." The chamber erupts, half in applause, half in outrage. And somewhere in that noise, the world begins to tilt. Tell me, have you ever realized that a whisper can travel farther than a shout? Would you dare to believe your words could move strangers you'll never meet? Mrs. Morrison brings you the clipping herself, her eyes alight with pride and fear in equal measure. "You've done it," she says softly. "You've forced them to listen." You shake your head. "We have," you want to say, but she's already looking beyond you, toward a horizon that feels closer every day. Still, with every step forward comes the echo of resistance. Pamphlets are confiscated. 2 women in London are arrested for obstructing public order after distributing leaflets about women's property rights. You read their names, Mrs. Sarah Cobden and Miss Eliza Brown, and feel your throat tighten. They could have been any of you. That night you write another letter, not to the papers this time, but to the women in your circle. Courage, you tell them. Even small ripples disturb still waters. What we begin here may take a generation to finish, but it has begun. Would you risk your peace today to give freedom to someone you'll never meet tomorrow? If change came too late for you, would you still fight for it? In September, London sends for Mrs. Morrison. She's invited to speak, carefully, formally, at a private salon hosted by reformist men and their wives. It's an enormous risk. If her husband finds out, it could destroy them both. Before she leaves, she presses something into your hand. A folded piece of parchment sealed with wax. "For when I'm gone," she says, "if they silence me, don't let this stay buried." When you unfold it later, your breath catches. It's her own essay. A fierce, eloquent argument for married women's legal personhood. Lines of fire disguised as scripture. "A woman's soul is not her husband's property," she writes. To deny her ownership of herself is to deny God's own image in her. You hide it beneath your diary, knowing it could ruin you both if discovered, and also knowing you'll protect it at any cost. Weeks pass without word. Then one morning, a thin envelope arrives, postmarked London. The talk was a success, Mrs. Morrison writes. They listened, some even nodded, perhaps only out of politeness, but still they listened. Her words bring tears to your eyes, not because victory is near, but because, for the first time, it feels possible. Charles notices the difference in you. Not rebellion this time, serenity. He watches as you manage the household, as you write at your desk, as you greet guests with quiet confidence. You seem content, he says one evening. Are you? You pause, thinking carefully. I think, you say slowly, I'm beginning to understand what contentment really means. It isn't peace, it's purpose. He doesn't answer, but for once he doesn't look away. Would you rather live quietly without meaning or restlessly with purpose? Can contentment exist in a world still unbalanced? By winter, the letters have reached France, then America. You receive one from a woman named Lucy Stone, a name you'll later recognize in history books. We read your words here, she writes. Different country, same cage. Keep writing. They can't burn every paper. You laugh through tears, because it's true. They can burn pages, but not ideas. That night, as the snow gathers on the windowsills, you light a single candle and whisper, "We are not angels. We are architects." The phrase has become something bigger than you now. Printed, quoted, shared, alive. You blow out the flame. The darkness doesn't frighten you anymore. So tell me, if you could build a future you'll never live to see, would you still pick up the hammer? And if history remembered only your words, not your name, would that be enough? Winter bites harder this year. Frost creeps across the windows like lace, and every breath fogs the glass. Whitmore Hall feels quieter than ever, not peaceful but watchful. The movement, now spoken of across England, has a new name in the press: the Silent Rebellion. What began as letters between wives has become a network of women, teachers, widows, midwives, even servants, writing, meeting, dreaming. And for the first time, the men in power can't quite dismiss it. But the victory brings danger with it. When power listens, it also punishes. The news arrives like a stone thrown through glass. Mrs. Turner has been arrested. Her husband found her letters, copies of your essays, lines copied in her careful hand. He called it treason. The magistrate called it incitement to moral disorder. They took her away before dawn. Mrs. Petton brings you the news, her voice shaking. They're holding her in the county jail, she whispers. They say she'll be made an example. You sit in stunned silence, teacup trembling in your hand. An example. The polite English word for ruin. Tell me, have you ever realized the cost of courage only when someone else pays it? Would you still fight, knowing your freedom could end at sunrise? That night you can't sleep. The house groans in the cold, the fire burns low, and the wind whispers through the chimney like a warning. You think of Mrs. Turner, her soft voice, her careful hands, her timid bravery. You remember how she once said, "I didn't know anyone else felt this way." And now she's paying the price for feeling it aloud. You open your diary and begin to write, your pen shaking, not from fear but fury. If they silence one of us, they must hear the rest. We have been invisible too long to disappear again. For the first time you sign your name. Not a lady of the parish. Not a wife. Not a woman who remembers. Just Catherine Whitmore. You fold the paper, seal it, and send it to the London Chronicle at dawn. When Charles sees it 2 days later, he doesn't speak. He walks into the breakfast room holding the paper like something contagious. "Did you write this?" he asks. You meet his gaze. Yes. He stares at you for a long, unbearable moment. Then he sets the newspaper down. "You've destroyed us," he says quietly. "No," you reply. "I've named us." Would you trade safety for truth if you knew the world might never thank you? If speaking your name meant losing everything, would you still want to be heard? Within a week, the letter spreads everywhere. Your words, bold, clear, signed, become a rallying cry. Women copy them by hand and hide them in prayer books. One newspaper reprints them under the headline, "A wife speaks for the silenced." The backlash is immediate. Some call you brave. Others call you wicked. A few call for your arrest. And yet, for every man shouting in outrage, 10 women whisper your name. Mrs. Morrison visits under the cover of darkness. They're furious, she says, half smiling. They can't punish you all. Then they'll try, you reply. She nods. And we'll make it impossible. Days later, you and Mrs. Petton travel to the county jail. The road is long and muddy, the air thick with the scent of wet iron and despair. When you finally see Mrs. Turner, she's thinner, pale, but still standing. They can't keep me long, she says softly. There's no crime for being alive. You press her hand through the bars. Her eyes glisten, but her voice doesn't shake. I heard about your letter, she whispers. Thank you. You swallow hard. It wasn't bravery, you say. It was the least I could do. Have you ever realized that heroism often looks like exhaustion? That sometimes the bravest act is simply showing up again tomorrow? When you return home, Charles is waiting. He looks older, worn, uncertain. He doesn't raise his voice this time. He only says, I don't recognize you anymore. You take a slow breath. Then perhaps, you say, you're finally seeing me. He says nothing. For once, you feel no need to fill the silence. That night, you sit by the fire. The letter to Mrs. Turner's lawyer beside you. The names of other women who need help filling your notebook. Outside, snow falls softly, each flake fragile on its own, but unstoppable together. You whisper, this is what change sounds like. And somewhere in the distance, you imagine other women whispering it too. So tell me, when the world turns against your truth, will you hide until it passes, or stand in the storm until the air is clear again? Years pass, empires shift, fashions change. The world beyond Whitmore Hall grows louder, railways, telegraphs, factories, but your life moves in quieter revolutions. Charles grows old before you. His hair turns silver, his voice softer. The sharp edges of his pride wear down to something like resignation. He never mentions your letters again. Perhaps he's made peace with them. Or perhaps he simply learned that silence is sometimes the only truce. Mrs. Morrison moves to London, where her husband's sermons are now politely ignored. She writes for reform journals, speaks at gatherings disguised as charity events, and signs her name with steady, fearless ink. Mrs. Turner, after her release, lives in a small cottage near Bath. Her husband is gone, not dead but irrelevant. She teaches reading to factory girls now, and sometimes writes you letters filled with small joys. Spring flowers, laughter, hope. You meanwhile remain at Whitmore Hall, not as a prisoner, as a witness. Your diary has grown thick with pages, a chronicle of a life lived between obedience and defiance. Every entry a quiet rebellion against disappearance. Tell me, if no one remembered your name, but your words changed the world, would that be enough? You've stopped sending letters to the newspapers. Others write now. You read their names with pride. New voices, bolder voices, carrying your torch forward. They call themselves reformers, suffragists, campaigners for justice. You smile at the new words, knowing they're only newer names for something ancient. The refusal to stay invisible. Sometimes young women visit, students, journalists, curious minds. They speak of progress, of new laws that allow women to keep their earnings, of petitions demanding the vote. They sit in your parlor wide-eyed and ask, what was it like, Mrs. Whitmore, when women first began to fight? You always pause before answering, because how can you explain it? The fear wrapped in gentility, the danger hidden beneath lace gloves? So you tell them the truth simply, it wasn't about fighting. It was about remembering we existed. Have you ever realized that history doesn't move in leaps, but in quiet footsteps no one hears until centuries later? Could you find peace knowing your voice was only one among thousands, but that without it, the chorus would be incomplete? When Charles dies, the house becomes truly yours for the first time. His relatives expect you to remarry, but you don't. You spend your mornings writing, your afternoons walking through the gardens you once tended for appearances, and your evenings reading letters from women whose names fill newspapers now. Frances Cobbe, Millicent Fawcett, Josephine Butler. You smile when you read them, because you know each one carries a trace of the same fire. You begin organizing your papers, your diary, your essays, your correspondence. You tie them with blue ribbon and label them for those who come after. You imagine a girl decades from now, finding them in some dusty attic, opening them like a window onto the past. Would you leave your story behind if you knew someone else might finish it for you? Is legacy just memory, or is it an act of faith, trusting that your words will find new eyes? One spring evening, you walk into the study and find a young maid dusting the shelves. She picks up one of your old journals, runs her fingers over the faded ink, and whispers, "Did you really write all this, ma'am?" You smile. "Yes, every word." She hesitates. "I like to write too," she admits. "Not letters. Stories." You hand her the book. "Then take this one. It belongs to you now." She stares wide-eyed. "I couldn't." "You can," you say. "Every woman should have her own words." She leaves clutching the diary as though it were treasure. And for the first time in years, you feel the world turning again, quietly, beautifully, towards something better. That night, you sit by the window watching the stars rise over the hills. The same stars you watched as a frightened bride, as a lonely wife, as a quiet revolutionary. You whisper to them as you once whispered to your diary, "I was here," and somehow that feels like enough. So tell me, if you could speak to the future from the silence of your time, what would you say? Would you ask them to remember your name, or simply to keep the flame alive? Because maybe that's the truth history forgets. That survival is victory, that endurance is rebellion, and that even the softest voices can echo forever. The clock on the mantle chimes midnight, and you close your eyes, not in surrender, but in peace. The world outside keeps moving, and within it your words, alive, restless, unstoppable, go on speaking for every woman who ever learned to be dangerous, in the shape of devotion.